you're doing brain chemistry, your atoms smash together, and it shunts particles. The heat generated shunts particles into higher and lower, higher energy states, and some of them fall into lower ones. It's just a wee bit of, quantum mechanics. But as that happens, you're changing the state. So as you're thinking about your hopes and dreams, you're changing the state of particles in your brain. But there's a family of particles called fermions, and one of the kind of rules are no two fermions can be in the same state at the same time in the universe. So as you think about your hope or your dream, the whole universe has to agree. It must on some level know what's the chemistry going on inside your head, which is a product of what you're imagining, to make sure that no other of these particles can be in the same state as the one inside your head. How cool is that? So when you imagine something, a dream or say a prayer, the universe hears you. It really does, in that sense. So I think that's kind of cool. But if you go down even deeper, and I mentioned the fabric of reality, what you have is this interconnectedness. And I think everything else is like a projection, a shadow, if you like. It's an echo. You see the same pattern repeating itself. Not everyone will agree with that, but I really think that's how things work. And you see this echo, you see this interconnectedness as a phenomenon at every level. And that begins to explain some of the research that you may be familiar with of people who can be separated by distances, but yet one thing happens to one and the brain of the other shows it up. So, give you a very typical, one of the good experiments at Bastyr University in Seattle. They took couples who shared a strong emotional bond. One's in an MRI scanner, the other's down the corridor. So, and the one down the corridor, after about 10 or 15 minutes, the scientists flash a light in their eyes so it gets the startle response. But that moment, the partner's brain thinks they saw it. And you see a movement of blood and oxygen, so a light, if you like, lighting up in the MRI of the partner's brain. So in other words, one person saw something, but the partner's brain thought they saw it. And there was a correlation. They actually refer to these experiments as correlations between the neural state of people separated by a distance. And you see the same thing all over. People have been doing these studies for years. And you can either ignore all the research. If you're wedded to the idea that consciousness is inside the head, you have to ignore all that research is flawed. Or somehow the researchers are misguided. But what if they're not? And what if they're really intelligent people probing something that's real? Then what you're left with is the idea that consciousness isn't in here, but it's out there. And it means that what you think about is somehow having effects. It's somehow linked with, correlated with, shaping and moulding and changing, and perhaps even healing people who are not physically in contact with you. And there's, again, a lot of research going into that kind of stuff. And I know that probably this audience is all familiar with that kind of stuff. And what I love is, I think there really is real scientific ways of understanding this kind of thing. And I've always been, you've been a scientist by training, I've always been interested in how do these things work. So I think about these things a lot. I'm really no fun to have dinner with, talking about work, But one of the things I think is really, really cool, one of my favourite subjects is time. Right? I've always understood that if things are interconnected in space, then they must be interconnected in time. Now, the universe is infinite, right? And it all derives from, the fabric of reality, which therefore must be infinite. And if you are, consciousness is the fabric of reality, then you must be infinite. Technically speaking, you then existed before you were born. But it's a no-brainer, it's pretty obvious. But here, what I love is that scientists are now one level up, the quantum level, showing this interconnectedness in time. And that time seems to be bendable. We can even change the past. As amazing as it sounds, that science has actually been done. And, I was researching, when I was researching for my book last year, Is Your Life Mapped Out? I dived into this subject. I've been dying to touch this subject for years. Time, interconnectedness in time. And I really got my head wrapped around it. I'm no fun at dinner, because it's all technically mind-screwing stuff. But one of these experiments that they did, it's called a delayed choice experiment. So many people are familiar with the famous double slit experiment in physics, where you fire photons through two slits, and you see marks on the back, and you can measure whether the particle is waves, whether the photon is waves or particles. And it depends on how you set the experiment up. If you set the experiment up to measure waves, then what you see is wave behaviour. If you set the experiment up to measure particles, then you get particle behaviour. But what if you don't set the experiment up What if you don't decide to measure waves and particles until after the photons have gone through the slits? Well, presumably, the wave function, as they call it, has collapsed. Or presumably, the decision, the choice has been made. It's either waves or particles. As soon as it goes through the slits, logically you think it's either going to be waves or particles. But it turns out that the decision that you make after it's gone through the slits determines what actually happened in the first place. Amazingly. Yeah. And it's like we're changing the past. But what if we're not actually changing the past? What if there's more than one past? Because I believe ahead of us the future is probabilistic, meaning there's more than one future. And if you sense the future and then change it, it means that both must have existed. If information is coming backwards through time and received by your consciousness, then multiple futures must exist ahead of you. All of them smeared out. And the one that you experience isn't the future, it's just the one that's most likely, given the contents of your mind and the momentum of your life and the way in which you tend to think most of the time. But what if the past is the same? And what if there's more than one past? What if there's multiple histories? And when you make a decision after the photon has gone through the slits, that decision seems to flip from one reality or one history into another, where that was what happened all the time. Wouldn't it be amazing if we did this with our minds? And I think we do it all the time. I think sometimes when we do healings and stuff and the re-imprinting, then what we're actually doing, perhaps, is flitting into a reality or a history where that healing was always there. For that which needed to occur had always, the seeds of it were already sown in that history. And you get this ripple back through time and you get this spontaneous change. I actually think that's how things work. There's seed moments in time where the conditions are most right for things to happen. And it gets even better because recently, in 2011, scientists did the first mathematical calculations to suggest that entanglement in time, if entanglement exists as the state of the universe, because most cosmologists will agree, at the beginning of the universe, all particles were entangled, connected, so therefore they must remain entangled today. But entanglement, if time and space are equivalent, then entanglement in time must exist. And mathematicians did the calculations in 2011 to show that entanglement in time must exist. 2012, another group actually did the experiment, just last year. They physically did the experiments. Similar to the double slit experiment, they managed to entangle particles in the past that no longer even existed. It's almost like the particles have died. They've lived and died their life. But a choice made now seems to have determined the state of them before, in the past. I think that's so amazing that I think we're actually doing this all the time. There's been a number of experiments back in the 70s that were just really ignored for years and years and years, where they did these experiments where, many people are familiar with the Princeton research, the pair research, where you had random event generators and one person could sit and focus on something and seem to alter statistically the numbers that are appearing on the screen, so to speak, or the falling of balls, and consciousness is impacting random events. But they did a lot of these experiments back in the 70s, before Princeton really got their hands on this, where they actually, the random numbers were recorded like 45 days ago, or a month ago, or 2 or 3 months ago, and yet people sitting in front of a computer could change the randomness on the screen, because they didn't know that the numbers had been pre-recorded, 45 days ago. And what was happening then is somehow what you were imagining now was changing what happened in the past. But I would suggest it's not actually changing the past. What if it's actually, there's another past, and another one, and what we do is we, through the decisions and the choices and what we imagine and what we visualise and intend in the present moment, moves to a symbol, another past, where that always happened, where the healing was there. The conditions were perfect for that healing to be spontaneous here in the present. And I honestly think that's how things work. And I love it. I find it so interesting, that kind of stuff. So these are the kind of things that I think about quite a lot. And I've been thinking about it for years because I first got interested in spontaneous remissions about a year after I left the pharmaceutical industry. So I'd been there for 4 years, and about a year later I dived away out of the science. I had to experience the whole metaphysics stuff. And I did a year training to be a crystal healer. I just wanted to feel something. I wanted to go so far and understand another language and see if I could feel what people were talking about. It's different languages. Scientists can be quite, cutting about people over there, meaning what they call spiritual people. But a lot of it's just a different language. Just say some of the same things. And I dived right over there to experience what that's all about. And then I kind of came back, as you know, we had an introduction, to about the middle, where I quite like to dabble in both sides, and there's a lot of good stuff all over the place. But I remember a few friends and I had co-founded a charity about a year after I'd left the pharmaceutical industry called Spirit Aid Foundation. It was for children around the world whose lives had been affected by war and poverty. And we had a group of volunteers, and one lady came in one day and asked to volunteer her time. And she really gelled with the group. And we thought, yeah, please do become part of the team. And it turned out that almost all of the volunteers actually at the time, the name Spirit Aid Foundation attracted people who were all healers, who had this kind of a very holistic spiritual outlook. And this was back in 2001. And so this lady joined the charity, and she'd never heard of healers, except in the context of the Bible. I mean, nowadays, this is what, 2013, every man and his dog does Reiki now. It's very widespread. I mean, my next door neighbour's dog is a Reiki master. But in 2001, it wasn't really as popular as it is nowadays. And she'd never heard the term healer, except in the context of the Bible. Or, the American charismatic healers who go, praise the Lord, and lift the person up and they get off the wheelchair and walk across for the first time in 25 years. She thought that that's what we did. And being the kind of founder, or one of the founding members of the charity, she thought I was this master healer. And she looked at us different. She actually thought we were like biblical people who travel around the world, and we have these amazing people who have congregated in Glasgow and Scotland, and we just walk around healing people. And she honestly thought that's what we did. She's very gullible, isn't the right word. That's not a very respectful word. She's very open-minded. She has the wonder of a child. She's very open-minded and would believe anything. And that's the prime person who responds to the placebo effects and hypnosis and all that kind of stuff. And I thought I'm going to have to explain to Linda. Didn't mean to tell her anyway. I was going to explain to John about how the mind affects the body, and dogs are Reiki masters nowadays. But I just forgot because we get so busy in the charity. And then one day she came in, and she had a terrible cold or the flu. And she was shivering, and she said, my bones are cold. When you actually can't get warm and you feel cold in the room, you've got 5 layers of clothes in the room and you're still shivering. And she came in like that one morning. She was really ill, and I said, oh, Linda, you look terrible. Not the kind of thing you say to a woman, really. But you look terrible. Why don't you just go home and recover? And she said, oh, I just want to help the Wains. Wains is a Scottish word for children, because the charity is for children. I just want to help the Wains. And I said, but you'll help them better if you go home and recover. And she says, no, if I can just do a tiny thing to do that makes a difference in one child's life, then that makes it all worthwhile. And that really, I thought that was very touching. That shows you the kind of person she is, really lovely, compassionate person. And I suddenly remembered recently when she joined the charity that she'd thought we were these healers, and I was this super master healer. And I thought, oh, she still believes that. I wonder if she can heal herself. If I play that role, then I wonder if she, believing in me, could heal herself. So I tried to, when you do these kind of things, you've got to really look, confident. So I kind of went, as you do in Glasgow and Scotland, I went, do you fancy a wee healing? And she goes, oh, no, I'll be fine. We're all martyrs in Scotland. And I go, honestly, I'd like to help you. And she said, oh, will it not drain all your energy? And I go, I've been warming up to this for a fortnight. I've done a healing for ages. All this energy. And she goes, oh, thank you so much. I didn't think I would ever get a healing. Oh, I feel so privileged. Oh, thank you. I feel so privileged. One of these people to receive a healing. And I'm like, I ain't bothering that. Sort you out now. You've got to play see the confidence that you exude activates the mirror neuron system, and then the other person's belief in you. Some playing the role. And then, sometimes, you believe the stuff other people say about you and you lose yourself for a second. So I walked up to Linda, like that, John, sorry. walking up, and I'm saying, I'm going to put your hand, first of all, I'm trying to build up the belief that she has. And I'm saying, look, I'll put my hand on your head, and, you know, you might feel a wee zap. And I thought, what did I say that for? Because in her mind, she's expecting a bolt of lightning to shoot at her. And I'm thinking, how am I going to do that? And then as luck would have it, bolt of lightning, no, I didn't do it. As luck would have it, I remembered a time, years ago, when I was in my first year at university, and a group of us had gone on holiday to somewhere on the west coast of Scotland, 10 of us. And I was only 18 at the time, and it was just a student kind of thing, lots of beers and vodka, and just enjoy having friends, and for the first time really, you know. And we all went to this place, and where we were staying was a wee cottage in the middle of nowhere, like 2 miles from civilization for the beach and all. And one day we were down at the beach, and I was, you know, being 18-year-old, and, you know, I was trying to show off. Young guy. We were on the beach and I was standing on the rocks, jumping from rock to rock, and no one was really paying me any attention. I thought it was kind of cool as well, jump over the waves. And no one paid any attention until I slipped and fell in the water. Then all of a sudden they were all watching and clapping. And now I'm saturated. I'm wearing this big ski jacket and thin suede gloves. This is February and it's Scotland. Pretty cool. And I'm freezing cold, but I'm now saturated in salt water. Right? And You'll see where that's going in a few moments when we get to that part of the story. Cue lightning rod thing. Anyway, not quite as severe as that. So anyway, I'm back at the beach and say, I need to go home, I'm freezing. And my friend Stuart, Mr. Compassion, goes, you'll dry in. I'm like, thanks for your compassion. But after about 20 minutes, we're all really cold with it. Well, let's just go home. We'll go back to the cottage. So we're walking up to the cottage. It's taken ages. And I remember, I'm good with maps. And I remember, what's the point of walking all these roads around here that the cars go? That field and another field, and we're there 5 minutes. So I managed to convince everyone to take a shortcut over the field. So we're all climbing over this fence, and most people are over it. And cue the sledgehammer. She must just pulse. Right? Because I seemed to be okay for like 5 seconds, and then boom. And later that night, I'm explaining to my friends over a couple of beers, and going, you know what it felt? It felt like someone put their hands on your skin, pushed it up, and I had people going like that. And said, it feels like an electric shock. Anyway, as luck would have, I remember this. So I'm going up to John, and I'm saying, you might feel a wee jolt, and all of a sudden, without even losing the facial expression of confidence, I suddenly remembered how I can fake the electrical jolt thing, because she's not going to know it's not a bolt of lightning. So I'm walking up, conveying the confidence, and I goes, well, as you know, it only takes a second. You know, because I'm really building up what she believes. So I put my hand on her head. I pushed her skin up really fast and gave her a wee shove, and just blotted out in my mouth, I just said, cold cancel. And she went, it's cold cancer, where that came from. And she went, ah. And I'm going, what's she doing that for? And I thought, she's seen it on the telly. But that must be what you do. But anyway, she goes like that. Wow. And she was 100%. I was kind of going for you at the end of the day, she'd feel a bit better. That took about 3 seconds, and she's like, and for the rest of the day she's on the computer, she's making the tea, and she's buzzing away like a wee busy bee. And I'm thinking, I had to go into the toilet and sit in the pan for 10 minutes. Just to try and process what had just happened there. What on earth went on there? Because I've been reading about spontaneous remissions, but I thought, how on earth? And that's when I first really started to think about, you know, there's obviously a biochemical mechanism, but maybe there's something deeper. Maybe deep belief can almost, like if the world that we experience is like a projection on a cinematic screen in 3D, and when we think and dream and hope about things, it's that we make an impression on the real, and it projects up into the cinema of our life in 3D, and we experience that which is in our heads. The problem is, many of the times, we pay more attention to the stuff that we hate that isn't working, so we're making multiple impressions in the real, and connecting ourselves to all these things that we don't like. And I think maybe at a really deep and profound level, the starting point for these phenomena that probably happen all the time is maybe in the fabric of reality, where our own consciousness construct the state of the body. It just so happens that because we have these psychological structures, which are, you know, mass psychological structures, if you like, that say this is how things work, then we tend to see permanency in the world. But maybe some of the miracles you hear about over history, actually, maybe many of them did happen. And it really was just a shift in consciousness to harness more of this power within us. And of course, there's always a biochemical mechanism. There's always something molecular to explain. You'll always find the molecules. But maybe where it all starts is deep down here. So I think that's how stuff works. And there's an interconnected space and time. And I just want to leave you with one extra wee tip. That if ever you're imagining healing or imagining changing your life, I think many of us, sometimes we're afraid, what if it doesn't work for me? Or what if I don't get this healing? What if I don't recover? What if I don't meet the person of my dreams? What if it doesn't work? And sometimes we feel this pang of fear, what if it doesn't work? Here's a really good tip to go over that. Every time you feel the fear, burst into a silly wee dance. I call it my victory. That's the only move I can do, by the way. I call it the victory dance, and what you're doing is you're celebrating victory over it, because what happens when your mind goes into fear is you get movements of resources in the brain towards the fear and anxiety parts, and that becomes a well-worn path. So every time you think about fear and anxiety, and it's like walking the same path in a cornfield, and it's well-worn, and that's the way the resources flow in the brain. So what you do when you think of it, instead of that, you want to create humour and laughter and send the resources to the front then and to other locations. So what you do is you do a silly wee crazy dance, and really, something really ridiculous to make you laugh. And you've got to laugh. You've got to do it long enough until you find yourself smiling or laughing at yourself. And then you're sending resources away from the fear and anxiety to the front. And the first time I was thinking about, I'd worked out this way of doing things, I was practicing it all the time. So I used to, when I'm writing my books, I tend to work in coffee shops. So I go into coffee shops anytime between 7 and 8 in the morning. That's my shift. I start there and I work till about 12, 1. And that's when I do most of my book writing. And so at the time I was walking from an apartment we were living in about a mile to, at the time my office at that point was Starbucks. And it was about a mile, just over a mile. I walked it every day. And I'd leave about 6:45 in the morning. And I'm walking along, and I'm doing wee victory dances in my mind. I'm doing wee visualisations and celebrating the victory with, obviously I want to do a victory dance, but you're not going to walk along at 7:45 in the morning doing that. So what I started doing is put my fingers, my hands in my pockets. And whenever I got to a wee dance that I wanted to do, I'd do that in my pockets. But I had to stop. Because I was concerned that some drivers thought I was interfering with myself. So I kind of upgraded and I started doing the victory dance with it. I had my laptop in a rucksack and I started doing that and stuff. And when I got a burst of energy, I just go, yeah! So I do all that. And then there was one day that I got to this roundabout. And there's 4 roads and there's 2 tunnels about 10 metres long underneath the roundabout. And I usually get there about 10 to 7 in the morning. Now, I'd walked that road for 2 years, and I think once I'd met someone under the tunnel. So it's a pretty good bet I can go away from there and really do the full victory dance in the tunnel, because I find it boosts your energy. It's like you call it the facial feedback hypothesis. If you smile a lot, then it sends signals back to the emotional chemistry, and if you make yourself laugh a lot, then it can actually change your emotional state. Similarly, if you put your body in a physiological state of happiness and excitement, then you can actually generate the physiology and therefore the emotions of that. And you keep practicing it and you top it up all the time. So I would do this every morning, get in the tunnel and start off like that, and then I'm moonwalking. That's not a good moonwalk, but it's the best I could do, And then I start going, and I go, and I'm jumping up and down, and I'm doing that kind of weird thing, and I'm spinning round, and I'm doing all these fancy moves. And one time it was the best victory dance I'd ever done. I was coming to Christmas time. Get the winter time, almost at the Christmas break, and I finished off, I'd done this amazing dance, and I finished off doing like that. And that's when I looked ahead of me, and there's a row of builders watching me. And I was absolutely mortified. They'd obviously been working night shift to finish an apartment complex before the Christmas holidays. And I'm standing like that. And in these moments of high, embarrassing stress, you ever notice that your brain stops working? And you can't think clearly. And you always do something wrong, because you're really not thinking clear at all. Because what happens is you lose a lot of the resources from the prefrontal cortex, the higher order thinking, decision making, and they flow backwards into the fear and anxiety, self-preservation bits. So you can't think, you've hardly any brain material, you've hardly any oxygen and blood there. And I'm like that. And that's when I went, hello? What are you going to do? But the thing is, now I've started it. You've got to keep up. So I'm now walking past this row of builders talking to my fingers. Yes, yeah, good to hear from you. And how are you doing? And it reminds me, I remember years ago, one of my favourite comedians is Billy Connolly. I remember watching the Scots comedian Billy Connolly talking about, this keeping up thing. Like when escalators first get invented, and this is back in the 70s, I think, or the 60s, and he's got these big flares on. And he's on an escalator for the first time, and he's going up like that, and he's thinking, the big flary trousers, oh, my trouser leg get caught in. And he's getting, what if a trouser leg gets, well, I get sucked in. But when you're a 20-year-old guy, you're trying to be cool, you can't admit you're afraid of an escalator, but he's going up there with his legs are like, I get sucked in, but you're trying to act kind of cool. And you're so self-conscious that you get to the top and you go like that and you trip. But he said, it's less embarrassing to pretend then that that's how you walk than to admit that you're afraid of an escalator. But he says, once you've started it, you've got to keep it up. So you're now walking through the shopping centre going like that. But what you do, it's quite clever this, is you gradually phase it out. A couple of steps. 3 steps. By the time you've walked 50 yards, you're just walking away. Nobody really notices where you are. I was kind of doing the same thing. I'm walking by this row of builders, talking to my fingers, and gradually getting quieter and quieter until I'm kind of going round the corner, and I put my fingers back in the pockets. This is testimony to the power of victory dancing. That I can now talk about this, and I'm not completely mortified and embarrassed. So it really does work. So anyway, that's everything I wanted to share with you today. Have we got any time? Right, well, thanks very much.